So John asked me to talk a little bit about my personal story and sort of how I got from where I started to where I am now, and a little bit about Markel. So I'll do that, but I would like to keep that as brief as possible and really respond to your questions and comments. So in terms of personal story, as John mentioned, I did start out as a CPA. And I became a CPA because that was what my father was. And I had a great relationship with my father. And he was a little older by the time I came along. He had his office in our house, and it was in the country. He had started out with a predecessor firm of Deloitte in Philadelphia and sort of paid his dues with that, but then always had a bit of an entrepreneurial streak, and so he wanted to start his own practice and do things. So he bought a 100-acre farm and set up this accounting practice, had his office in our home, and owned a liquor store and did real estate deals and just all sorts of things. And for people who are old enough to remember this, do you remember the TV show Green Acres? So I tell people that my father was halfway between Mr. Douglas and Mr. Haney. But I grew up around that, and I grew up around business. And so when I would come home from school, I would go and sit in my dad's office, and I would do my homework, and he would be talking to people on the phone, and different people would be coming in and out of his office to talk to him. And I was just sort of a fly on the wall. I got to observe this relationship and the way he did his business and the deals that he did and whatnot. And I just thought that was the funnest thing in the world. So I tried off to UVA, and I get an accounting degree, and I go to work for Coopers & Lybrand at the time. And as a staff accountant, I get thrown into a dark room to add up numbers. And you go through the textbook hazing things that the accountants who've been there a year do to the new accountants. Like if you could talk somebody into this, these old days, again, I'm marking my age here, but you would say, like with some staff accountant that's not really working on anything productively, he says, take page number 39 of the phone book and add up all the numbers, and then call the operator and ask for the total to see if you got it right. That is an actual prank that got done at that time, and that was harmless. The one I remember most, and fortunately I was not the victim of this, was, of course, we were coming out of school. We had no money. We were just starting out, but in those days it was before the era of business casual, so you had to wear a suit and tie. So some of the accountants that had been there a year or two managed to convince one of the new guys that, oh, at Cooper's they have a clothing allowance, so you can go spend $500, buy yourself a suit or two, some shit, and turn that in on your expense report, and they'll reimburse you. I still laugh at that one. So anyway, I started out as an accountant, and I quickly realized that in the world of Big 8 accounting, as it was at the time, but now the Final Four, that's a different thing than what my dad did. So people ask me how I got from accounting to investment. I said, well, I was an accountant who was more interested in dollars than numbers. And there's a very profound difference between the two. And I suspect your career path has had some of the same sort of aspects and twists and turns and entrepreneurial stuff. And a lot of us have gone down that. So at any rate, before too long, I found my way to Davenport and met a guy named Mike Beal, who many of you perhaps may know, who also was a former accountant. And he became my broker, and we just sort of hit it off and said something about coming to work with him at Davenport to be a broker and an analyst who would cover firms and find investment ideas and write reports for the firm. And I said, well, that sounds like fun. So I went and did that, and I was happy as it could be. And was at Davenport from 84 through 90, thought I was going to be there forever, as most of the people at Davenport are. But in 84, I read the first article I'd ever seen about Berkshire Hathaway. And I remember just thinking, just every word just dripped common sense. It's just made all the sense in the world to me, what Buffett was saying in 1984. And I went into the head of the department, a guy named Joe Antrim. I don't know if any of you remember Joe. He was a wonderful mentor, but he was pretty tough and pretty crusty. And I remember going in and saying to him, hey, Joe, have you ever heard of this guy, Warren Buffett? And he said, it's Buffett, you idiot, and threw me out of his office. So I was 23 years old at the time, and I tapped into the cutting edge technology of the day, which was an S&P tear sheet, which was these like sort of 8 by 7 pieces of paper that had a lot of just numbers and statistics on it. And it looked really good. I mean, as an accountant, I know how to look at financial statements and get the gist of whether this is a good one or a bad one. And I knew that was a good one. But stock was $400 a share or something like that. And so like a 23-year-old idiot, what I said was, no stock could possibly be worth $400 a share. So I proceeded to not buy it. But I did remember it, and I did start following it, and I did start looking at it. So it was painful tuition to not do that, but it set off a cascade of a germ of an idea that later on worked out. And that was in 1986, Markel went public. And luck of the draw, part of my serendipitous strategic plan, I was the analyst at Davenport who was assigned to cover Markel. So I went out to meet Steve Markel and just sort of learn about that business. And it was the same sort of notion where you had this specialty insurance company who would do sort of unusual forms of insurance, but actually make a profit in the base business of insurance itself, and was willing to invest the money longer term in the equity markets, stock markets, businesses, et cetera. And that was literally the architecture that Buffett had followed at Berkshire. And here in Richmond, Virginia was this company that was thinking about doing the same sort of things. I said, well, that sounds pretty cool. So from 86 through 1990, I was the analyst, covered Markel, wrote reports about him, got to know Steve. He became a friend, he became a client, we just sort of hit it off. In 1990, Markel did a deal where they more than doubled the size of the company. And Steve had been doing the investments by himself and thought, well, it's twice as big, maybe I could use a wingman to help me out. Said something to me about coming out there, and I said, that sounds like fun. And that was 25 years ago. I've been there ever since. And the day that I walked in the door, Steve handed me $2 million to manage out of the equity portfolio, out of a total pot of about 50. That was, the total size of the company might have been 60 or 70 million dollars at the time. And then things went well, and they sort of kept giving me more of it, and gradually turned it all over to me. And today, as we stand, the investment portfolio is on the order of $14-15 billion, and total balance sheet would foot to over $20 billion. And there have been several acquisitions along the way, well, 3 where we've bought companies that were basically as big as what we were. So we sort of doubled the size of the company in 3 transactions, and then we did a lot of tuck-in acquisitions along the way. Now that's the 80,000-foot view. Let me dive down to the 50,000-foot view to sort of describe a little bit about sort of how we think about things on that path, and how we would have chosen to do the acquisitions that we did, or what we looked at, and how we thought about things. So the first component of the engine that really drives things is the fact that Markel has a unique specialty insurance business. And one time at a cocktail party, somebody asked me, and this was in Chicago or someplace somewhere, they had no idea of who Markel was or whatnot, and it's just sort of cocktail party conversation, trying to make polite conversation. They said, well, what kind of insurance do you guys do? And I said, well, if you can think of a form of insurance that you need and you can get it easily and quickly, we don't do that. We do the stuff that somebody says, oh no, or whoops, or how could we possibly get coverage for this? Because oftentimes, I'm sure this is a familiar story for you, entrepreneurs will have ideas. You need some money. So whether it's a financing source, a bank, whatever that's going to lend money, well, that financing source almost always is going to require some form of insurance, so that should some catastrophic thing happen, that the financing would be protected. So there's a lot of stuff where an entrepreneur and a financial institution are trying to solve a problem, and we can take a blank sheet of paper and figure out a solution to provide insurance for that. And that would be the most basic way that I would describe insurance, and for what Markel does. And that would manifest itself in things like oil rigs out in the Gulf of Mexico or in the North Sea, children's summer camps that are hundreds of miles from their nearest sprinkler or a fire suppression system, or things of that nature. Bass boats with too big a motor on them. It's an unusual thing, and I see some quizzical faces. So, a bass boat, and I'm not an outdoorsman or fisherman, is a flat-bottomed thing. And if you went out to sort of get a bass boat off Cabela's or one of those places up there off I-95, it'll come with a 10 horsepower motor on it, or a 20 horsepower motor, something like that, which is more than enough to move a flat-bottom boat from point A to point B. But apparently in the bass fishing competition world, there's the theory that you need to get to that end of the lake a lot faster than the other people do. So you'll take a boat that's designed to have a 20 horsepower motor on it, and you'll put a 200 horsepower motor on it. Well, at that point, your homeowner's insurance, if you were at State Farm or something like that, that's a no-no. They do not like boats with that sort of dimension to them. And so we will provide insurance for something like that. And I will tell you, if you listen to what the claims department folks do, every single claim story on one of those reads exactly the same way. And it says, craft traveling at a high rate of speed hits submerged object, occupants hurled from the craft. So those are the sorts of things which we would provide in insurance for. And there's really a list of about 100 things. And it's a very creative place, and it's very energizing and exciting to be around creativity. I mean, there might not be some overlap that you would think between somebody with a 200 horsepower motor on a bass boat and the Virginia Museum. But actually at Markel, we deal with both of those worlds. So for instance, when you see those traveling exhibits that come through, the Rodin or the stuff from China, things like that, those things that move, well, the museum that owns that cares deeply that nothing should happen to it while it is in transit and moving around and not on their premises. So like the insuring of art and the movement of art around the world would be an example of the kind of thing we do. So again, these are not things that you would spend 15 minutes and save 15% or more on. A different form of insurance, all good, not right or wrong, just different, but that's the sort of thing that we did. Now from that, so there's an investment operation that's created by virtue of the fact that you have an insurance policy. Because the way insurance works is, and I'm sure all of you, again, in business are always, having to collect receivables. Well, there's one good thing about the insurance business, and that is you get paid up front. You got to pay the premium today. The claim comes later, and that's a unique feature of the nature of insurance. But what that means is, since we collect money today, well, then there's a pot of money sitting around, and that needs to be invested. So every insurance company has within it an embedded investment operation, and Markel does as well. Now, what happens in 99 out of 100 insurance companies is that money is invested in fixed income securities and very conservatively, and that's appropriate because when insurance claims come up, you need to be able to write a check that doesn't bounce to pay for that claim. And and there's a liquidity function, sort of a treasury operations function that goes along with that. And so that generally speaking describes the way most things work in the realm of insurance. Now, because Markel is specialty and unique, instead of every dollar coming in that $1 or maybe $1.03 or $1.05 or 99 cents would go out eventually in the form of claims and expenses, where you sort of have that treasury function, maybe we get for every dollar that comes in, historically, say 90 cents goes back out. But there's 10 cents that sticks to the ribs and stays inside the company longer term. So that 90 cents that we would expect to pay out in claims and expenses, we're going to invest that in the same way as every other insurance company. Very conservative, very high quality, very plain vanilla fixed income securities portfolio to do that treasury stuff. But that 5 or 10 cents that sticks to the ribs, that money should stay around forever. So with that, we can think about, well, if that money's going to stay around forever and we have a forever kind of time horizon, how would we invest that? So that money we can invest in equity securities. And that's the playbook that Buffett laid out that we saw, and we thought that was a good idea, so we started doing that too. And then similarly, that morphed into not just buying equity securities or stocks, but into buying controlling interest in businesses. And that's really how Markel Ventures got started. So to stop with formal comments in just a minute before starting to answer your question, that's how the money comes in. It comes in through the insurance side. The cut, that's how the cut works, that 90% of it's going to go into a plain fixed income portfolio, 10% is going to be invested longer term. Now, the last piece that I'll talk about is, so that money that's invested longer term, how do you think about that? What do you do? What's your thought process on that? And I say, well, really, there's 4 things that we look for. And the first is we look for profitable businesses, good returns on capital, and that don't need too much leverage.